So continuing on, trying to categorize the many types of Japanese dolls there are, we have, and what is the Japanese term you use?
So this one's Isho Ningyō.
Isho Ningyō. And
it's a little problematic as a term. I mean, because Isho means textile or fabric, because what you're looking at are dolls in which the fabric plays an important role. But that's sort of, and so sometimes people translate it as fashion doll, which is really moving off course. So what I prefer is that Isho is depicting aspects of popular culture that would have resonated with people back in the day. And the textiles, of course, are a part, but to me, it's more the stories and their functionality that gets me really, really excited.
And that's the exciting part
exactly.
of it. Absolutely, it is.
I mean, and not taking anything away from the textiles, because the textiles are absolutely wonderful, and just go for it. But in terms of a definition, to just restrict them to textiles by calling them fashion dolls, I think is missing the point.
And also within our Western doll culture, when you call something a fashion doll, it implies that that was their original purpose, was just to show the fashion they're wearing, where these go way beyond that.
And that would send you down the wrong road, because that's
exactly.
not. And then also these, as a rule, these are frequently their clothing are fixed onto them. Their clothes can't come off. So all these, except for this one, the clothing's fixed. You cannot change. There's no outfit changing going on here.
All right.
At all. Well,
then I'm going to step out of the way, because I know you have to come around the table to tell these, and they're just, well, like there's a couple on here that are my favorite, so I just want to let you go, or I'll just keep interrupting.
So this is it's an interesting category, because it's a somewhat complex category, because it overarches and embraces so much. So we're going to just pick up a little bit where the last video left off on Takeda Ningyo, because the story behind this one, so this is another Takeda Ningyo depicting kabuki performance, but you'll notice is of a woman. Again, unusual from a kabuki context, but all the female figures are actually depicting what are known as nagauta, or dance interludes. And you'll notice she's carrying two pails, and that's because she's telling a very specific story. And the stories are part of the hook. Love the textiles, love the faces, but boy, when you get into the stories, so this depicts shiokumi, or the salt maiden, and she and her sister collected sea salt, sea brine along the seashore to create salt. Say that 5 times. And into their life in this remote peninsula enters a nobleman from Kyoto who's been temporarily banished to Suma Bay, where he meets and falls in love with both sisters, and he lives happily with both sisters for a period of time. But then he's called back to court, and he leaves them in Suma Bay to go back to court, promising that he will send for them shortly. Well, Matsukaze, the Pine Wind, she waits daily for him to return, sort of devolves slowly into madness, puts on his robe, and begins to dance. And so the Nagauta dance performance in the kabuki, in kabuki, is her going from love into madness as she's waiting for her lover who never returns. And so shiokumi, the salt maiden, is this classic tale, beautiful dance interlude, poignant tale, beautiful doll. And so you get all these elements going through. Frequently, it's not a happy tale. I mean, her descending into madness because the guy jilted her is not fun, but memorable. And so this is shiokumi on a rocky shore with her pails to collect sea brine, wearing her lover's coat, waiting for him to return.
Well, I'm going to interrupt off stage.
Okay.
I love the story, but I'm left wondering about one element of the story that is left unexplained.
Okay.
What happened to the other sister?
She's not the one that evidently didn't love him as much. I don't know. They focus on Matsukaze. They're both there.
It could have been that she ran off with the guy and they left her there alone.
And that's why she's doubly upset.
Exactly.
And it could have happened because basically she exits stage left, really doesn't come back into it. She's there from the beginning, but it's always about her. I agree. What happened to her?
But isn't that's the exciting part about the stories. You're left wondering.
Yeah. Oh, and also just the beauty, the facial depiction, really, really extraordinary. So we're going to keep on our women theme here for a bit and moving more into a classic Isho Ningyō, dealing with stories and that type of thing. And what I love about this one is it actually depicts a Chinese character, yokihi. And yokihi is the subject of a very famous Chinese poem called the Song of Everlasting Sorrow. Again, you can tell it's going to be a happy tale. And yokihi was actually a brilliant strategist and ex-wife, or I forget what number wife she was, of a particular Chinese emperor. But he becomes so besotten with her that he begins to neglect his duties as emperor. And so the rival factions in court see her as a troublemaker, see her as needing to get rid of. So she's forced to commit suicide. These things happen. But in the tale of Song of Everlasting Sorrow, the emperor cannot forget her. And so he contacts a Taoist adept who travels to the afterworld to communicate with yokihi. And so there's a beautiful sort of like everlasting love story that goes on between yokihi in the afterlife and the emperor in this life. And we know, like, so, well, how do you know this is yokihi? There's a lot of things that you can look at. There's codes. There's Japanese ningyo, particularly in the Isho category, there's a lot of code language going on. So for example, when we look at her, we know she's a Chinese figure. How? We have these ruffled sleeves. We have a high-waisted belt. We have this very, very fetching bib. And we have these sleeve closures. And also she's wearing kind of boots. All of these point to a Chinese attire. And a Chinese effect. And yokihi, very popular in drama, in narrative. And so this is an Isho Ningyō of yokihi, her empress status there with the phoenix crown, but Chinese drive holding the ur, which features into the story as well as part of the Taoist component. So when people would buy these, the consumer back in the day would fall in love with the exotic nature because she's depicting a foreigner. At that point, Japan was closed to the outside world, so depictions of foreigner had an additive, exotic allure. Her ruffled sleeves, all of that spoke to otherworldliness, combined with the story of everlasting sorrow and life and death and love transcendent. It was a winner. And so she's a beautiful ningyo, Isho Ningyō, kind of the quintessence of what that form did. Beautiful textiles, beautiful form, but a narrative and a story behind. So yokihi's always been one of my favorites. Moving along into something completely different, we have several different categories that all ultimately get lumped under Isho Ningyō. And so Isho Ningyō began in the 18th century, largely as depictions of courtier elite and popular figures. So for a figure like this one's actually one of the earlier ones in the collection, dates to the first half of the 18th century, so really quite early, so early 1700s in date. Carved wood hair, beautiful features. The textiles, again, in wonderful condition, depicting a courtier based on the hakama trousers and the way the garb is. We know it's a member of the imperial elite. And so you have to remember back in this period of time, a lot of the cultural focus was on nobility, and so you find these wonderful depictions of courtiers as part of the early core element of Isho Ningyō. And interesting and ironically, the other core element would have been prostitutes. Either it was nobility or it was prostitutes. It's one or the other, because of course the courtesan culture was equally robust and inspirational for the Isho artisan. When you look at ningyo, sometimes they reveal a surprise. So for example, you see this elderly gentleman here, again, Chinese in form, because we see he has the very fancy boots. He has the high-waisted belt there under his beard that we saw up in the figure above. So we know we're dealing with a Chinese figure. And so all very, very interesting. He's holding a scroll and he's holding a fan. But the big reveal is when we take off his hat, he's got this extraordinary cranium. And this tells us without a doubt that we're not dealing with just your average Chinese individual. We're actually dealing with Fukurokuju, who is a god, one of the 7 gods of good fortune, representing longevity. And we know that from this very, very large cranium. And so you find Isho Ningyō depicting gods. You find them depicting prostitutes. You find them depicting imperial nobility. You find them depicting warriors. It basically, Isho Ningyō cuts across all spectrums of Japanese history and Japanese society, interpreting these figures that would be universally recognized by the consumer and depicting them in amazing form. And having a doll like this would have been auspicious, would have conveyed all sorts of positive elements. And I like pairing him with this group behind, because these are done completely out of silk crepe. So these depict the 7 gods of good fortune, all done in what's called chirimen. So these are known as chirimen ningyo. And each one depicts a specific god. So here we have the figure of Hote or Budai, the happy Buddha. You see them in Chinese restaurants, you want to go and rub his belly, and here you want to rub his belly as well. Very fat pendant earlobes indicating his divinity, holding his treasure sack, but all done out of chirimen and silk brocade, creating this very whimsical interpretation that technically probably would be considered an Isho Ningyō because it's dealing with aspects of popular culture. But so this was Hote. Here we have Daikoku, the god of daily wealth, with his treasure sack and his money mallet cap. But so each one has an identity, each one has a function. I love the big treasure sack in back. So he's bringing in also the fat earlobes, again, indicative of identity. So there's all 7 of the 7 gods of good fortune in here. In this original case with the glass insert, just super, super unusual and fun, and a little bit of a departure from the standard ningyo. But chirimen ningyo are an art form today. Chirimen ningyo are widely collected, and artisans create these incredible renditions of classic dolls, all done out of chirimen fabric with a very soft body construction. I'm sure there's a Western equivalent, but I have no idea what that might be. There's like felt dolls and that kind of thing.
Well, we find them amusing, but are they considered amusing?
Yes, they're done with sort of like a comedic. The 7 gods of good fortune are not sort of fire and brimstone. They bring happiness. They're frequently known for their foibles and their drinking habits than anything else. And so not something to elicit fear, but to elicit joy and happiness. The 7 gods of good fortune only bring in good luck into the home.
The Lenci dolls of Italy, I grant you, they're felt. They're not the silk crepe, but they. Many of the smaller ones have that same kind of really amusing characterization, and a lot of them are mythological as well, like their pond doll, for example.
There you go.
Is one of their most popular.
Well, I mean, because mythology is a popular source. I mean, that's why the myths have come around for so long, is that they maintain their relevance, across time. But I want to do I meant to do this little comparison because we had this doll up front, which depicts Fukurokuju with his big head. And then we have an equivalent in here with his big head, which is very easy to tell that it's the same character because he's got this very large protruding cranium, and then the big fat ears, which is again a symbol of divinity. In the smaller chirimen one, he has the scroll in his left hand as opposed to the right, little variations on that. But I
was curious about that. When they were done over the same character over a long period of time, would costumes change?
Costumes would change, but there's sort of almost like an iconography. There's certain attributes that are very commonly, like Daikoku back there had a money mallet. He always has his money mallet. Fukurokuju frequently he always has his scroll. That's one of his attributes. Hote has his treasure sack. Who else do we got here? Ebisu usually carries a giant fish under his arm. Yeah, so this is Ebisu, the god of daily provision, and he's got a giant sea bream, a tie. So these are very specific attributes, it's the iconography, particularly when you're dealing with a god. Typically they're going to have very limited variations on the theme. There could be a lot of creative interpretation within the details, but the core element has to be present.
You said something and I wanted to bring out, because people, again, trying to always bring things into people that only say, I only collect Western dolls, to tell you the correlations between the two cultures. Accessories. I mean, I have had entire catalogs of doll accessories, and it's one of the most popular auctions we have of accessories for fashion dolls or toys or little things. And as I've been working with these dolls, I've come to realize, she's holding that teapot in her hand, holding the fan, holding the pieces of the scroll you're talking about. All of these are such important elements. And one of the great things about this collection is how he has worked to keep all of the elements together with the pieces. These are so valuable.
I get emails and calls almost on a daily basis. My doll is missing this. My doll is missing that. Do you have this? It's like, well, no, I don't have a repository of the land of lost accessories. I wish I did, because it would help a lot of people, but not what I've done. But Michael has done a brilliant job in terms of keeping things intact that way. But I love how we can compare
wonderful.
Different interpretations of the exact same figure, and we know they're exact same figure even though it's completely different media. So the last two on this table, moving into a very different, and I mean a very different realm, is this figure here, mounted on this beautiful gold leaf base with a front aperture, depicting a red-faced shoujo, or a sea imp. And you wonder, well, why would anyone want a doll depicting a red-faced sea imp? And there's two reasons. One, shoujo, they drink a lot of sake. And when they drink sake, their whole face turns red, everything turns red, hence the red color, because they just love to drink and get a little messy. So she has a sake ladle in her hand, and I say her. Shoujo are pretty much, gender neutral as a figure. So, but with the hair, I tend to think feminine, but they're pretty much gender neutral. So the sake ladle, and then a big sake saucer. So the figure would be drinking lots of sake. But the reason for the red, and this is key and important, and again, I think one of the possibly differentiating elements within ningyo and some other categories of world doll culture, is that red was seen as having a very strong protective aspect. Red repelled evil, or alternatively attracted it away from you to it. And so it was very, very common. Measles and smallpox were, ubiquitous in many rural cultures. How do you handle it? How do you protect? Well, it was believed that a child who was afflicted with smallpox or measles, or likely to become infected with smallpox or measles, if they kept a red doll or a red object with them, that the smallpox demon would pass into the object and not into the child. Or if it was in the child already, it would leave the child and go into the object. So you find woodblock prints from the early 1700s depicting an obviously ill child seated in bed with many, many dolls surrounding it, with the idea that not that they're playing, not that they're trying to keep the child amused during this period of suffering, but that the measles demon would come out and go into the doll. So it became, within a certain element of society, a very affluent element of society, they would have these red-faced shoujo ningyo, crafted, and they would have been placed in the bedroom or in the sleeping chamber with the child to attract the smallpox demon out of it. So they were called Shoujo Ningyō or Hoso Ningyō, meaning measles or smallpox. So you can take it on a number of levels. If you didn't know that this was actually designed to protect measles and smallpox, you would think, well, this is a great character study of a sea imp, the shoujo, which was popular in theater and things like that. And yes, it's true, but behind that, the initial purpose had to deal with this protecting. It's one of the few things where they've used red gofun. You'll find slightly pigmented gofun in dolls after the 1850s, but this was an earlier doll from the early 1800s with red gofun specifically, and red hair, clearly. Even the eyebrows are painted red, depicting the shoujo, again, to protect the child from measles or smallpox. So Isho Ningyō, yes, but also a Hoso Ningyō, disease repelling doll. So super interesting, beautiful object, but again, I geek out on the backstory. And so finally on this table, we had talked about Mitsuore, or the triple jointed dolls, before in the Gosho context, but here we have a Mitsuore Ningyō in an Isho context, where this depicts a young lady at her wardrobe, and it's all, in this case, about the textiles, where she's got her garment, she's getting ready, she's trying to figure out what she's going to wear, multiple layers of garments. And this was actually we talked about the Thomas collection, so this was in the Thomas collection. It was photographed a number of times, both in the 1950s or early 1950s in Japan, but also a number of Japanese publications did sort of follow-up articles on the Thomas's yesteryear collection, and so this doll is featured in that. It was also featured in the Japan Society exhibit that we were talking about earlier when I first met Michael back in 1996. So this is a Mitsuore Isho Ningyō with her kneeling on her zabuton cushion, sort of trying to figure out what she's going to wear for the evening. But beautiful articulation on the legs. A little bit different structure in that she's a little difficult to stand upright, but because of the top heaviness, but again, beautiful, beautiful structure. Sometimes these are known as ane-sama, or elder sister dolls. That's one of the titles. But when you have this sort of articulation and with the additional of the clothing, it's more of a Mitsuore Isho. I'm just going to lay her back down there. She's taking a little nap before she goes out. It's her disco nap before she heads out. So, and the final one is this guy. Isho, again, embracing a wide variety of forms. And for me, he's sort of the prize pony of the show in terms of happiness. You cannot look at this boy, Chinese boy, again, we know Chinese because of the ruffles, because of the footwear, just an extraordinary delight incarnate. Just the deep carving of the features, the deep creases, the hands out in this gesture. I promised myself I wouldn't do that, but you look at them, you have to imitate. But then also the hair done in a Chinese style with these sort of, turn this slowly, pom-pom. This is a discovery piece. Just if you look at, if you can zero in on the hair, just absolutely extraordinary with these carved wood knots covered in the gofun, depicting a Chinese boy. I love him. Maybe
is this wooden, Alan?
This is all, again, in this one you were dealing with wood head, wood hands, a fairly simple underbody. If you took the clothes off, it wouldn't be very impressive. So the artistry went into the heads and hands, and then also the textiles. The textiles themselves are an artistry. But underneath is sort of a rudimental armature to support the body. And we were talking about that earlier when you started getting into a desire for changing clothing, you got more sophisticated in how the body was depicted underneath. This was never designed for that. This is known as a karako, or a Chinese child, and this is a good segue into our next video. Stay tuned for that. But karako, Chinese children were seen as very auspicious. So they brought in good fortune, they brought in happiness and joy. It was a painting motif used very, very early in Japanese court circles and parodied out by all elements of society. So the karako himself, the Chinese boy, was basically the quintessential auspicious, beckoning, welcoming figure for good fortune, longevity, and also a conduit between this world and the gods, which will tie into our very, very last piece.
Yeah, right, and this is the last piece we're going to show in this. Alan, this has been absolutely wonderful. I cannot tell you. I think people will be tuning in and watching it over and over and over again because of all of the information. You are so fabulous. I cannot express it enough. And so many of the nuances and the facts that I just could have sat there. I was trying to take notes on everything you said. It's a wonderful collection. We're really privileged that we're going to be able to be offering this to all of you to see. And as I point out, what have we shown? Maybe 20 pieces, 25 pieces? There's 250 pieces in this auction. Exactly. And it was really hard picking out what we'd show you today, but we wanted to have a representation, and they're all just as wonderful. So tell us about this piece.
Well, and just as you're saying, this is a small sliver. It's just the tip of the iceberg, and the iceberg is so interesting. Figuring out which contours to talk about, but this one owns a special place in my heart, so I thought, and it's also so different and so unique that I thought that it would be a fun place to end, but also maybe trigger a beginning for collectors. So Japan has, as we've talked about before, a beautiful love affair with dolls as entertainment, working dolls into ceremony, working dolls into festivals in a way that the West did not typically do. And one of the more vibrant and spectacular manifestations of ningyo in this public festival context are the festival carts. And there are, anyone goes to Japan, Kyoto in July to the Gion Matsuri is probably the most famous. And it centers on the parade of 33 carts through town. Massive. I mean, this is a scale model of a different festival, but a scale model. Imagine this several stories tall. That's what we're looking at. Life-size dolls in the top of the carriage. And these are paraded through town, again, have a sort of a propitiatory or a talismanic kind of function originally, but it also became very popular for small-scale models to be depicting the various floats that would be paraded through town. This is actually from the Nagoya area. We mentioned it earlier where the Takeda family moved to Nagoya and did mechanical puppets within a float context. Well, again, this would be our karako. This is our Chinese child entering in, ushering in the festival cart. The cart moves, he drums, he beats the drum up front. You can see the karako has the little pom-pom little hairstyles. But so we've talked a little bit about the merchant class and whatnot. Each guild, each neighborhood guild frequently, historically, would get together in these specific towns, and they developed these specific floats to represent their guild. And this one, it's a parasol style, so very, very particular to this particular float festival. From the flower of Hanagasa, the flower umbrella. And these, I think there's 12 or 13 in this particular festival, and so this would have been a miniature model depicting that guild's thing. So They're heavy. Oh my God, these things are so heavy. So it takes the entire guild and the neighborhood. There's no power steering. These are solid wood wheels with iron banding, and they're pulled through. There's no automation. There's no car. There's no horse cart. This is all wheeled through the cities, and then they get to a corner.
You don't mean this piece. You mean
the full-scale, two-story
right.
size thing. And then they get to a corner and they have to turn it. So the turning of the cart, they have to pour water on the ground so that the festival, it's a whole community, but they come together. But the ningyo that are interpreted or used are local treasures. They are part of the community. They're not worshiped because that's not the right vibe, but they are honored and they're seen as part of the family. And so this cart, they were made very difficult to find outside of Japan. So this particular card I've never seen before with this gigantic butterfly up top. I'm going to deconstruct it here just briefly so you can see what's going on in back. So this is the giant butterfly that forms the top of this particular float. Very, very distinctive. The specific guild, Mikuruyama. And so the butterfly comes. So I'm going to just sort of disassemble slowly so show how it works. And then you have the butterfly, the flower parasol, the hanagasa, comes off thus. And all silk flowers, beautifully done. I mean, the detail on the flowers alone is just extraordinary with a wicker undercarriage. The basket's always been here. I think it keeps it from sliding under. I'm not sure technically the function. But when you do that, you reveal that the karako is actually ushering in the god Daikoku. This does not come out. So that is the god Daikoku with his money mallet. We mentioned him several times. Treasure sack on this side. He's standing on 2 rice bales. And so our karako is ushering in the god. So as the cart comes in, it's not just a cart. It's not the butterfly. It's not the flowers. It is the god Daikoku, the god of daily wealth, being ushered into the presence of the community. He's frequently depicted as a foreign god, very darkly complected at times. Beautiful silk brocades, amazing fat earlobes, almost hidden imperceptibly underneath the flower thing. But once you unveil this, it's extraordinary. Surrounded by the silk brocades. Underneath, because it's a mechanical doll, underneath would be people who are actually pulling the strings and helping manipulate these dolls as a mechanical doll. So karakuri float, or they're called dashi, or float dolls, karakuri dashi ningyo, are a subgenre. And these miniature models, I've never been able to get my hands on one. So this is a very, very exciting, a very unusual,
extremely rare,
different, rare option, but also very, very specific. We can get documentation on this specific float, when the guild first started doing it, how many men, it's like there's history in this as well, because it's not a type, it's not of a type, it's of a very, very specific identifiable
So it's
float.
a guild of a certain industry.
It's a guild within a town.
What would this industry be?
It's a neighborhood guild. That would be, I'd have to go back and dig a little bit more, remember a little bit better. So in this town, there are different neighborhoods. Each neighborhood has a guild that's formed that's associated with the float. I'm not sure if every member of this guild does the same craft, but they form a guild because this is their job, to take care of the float. Part-time job, clearly. And every year, annual festival is their job to bring it out, to care for it, manipulate it through the street. And so I think that's what I mean by guild, as opposed to the people who did woodcraft or who did textiles. It's more the guild associated with. And if you look in the very bottom, it has a Chinese style tapestry.
The cart itself is absolutely
because the whole thing, there's like a carpet inside it. Because frequently the neighborhoods, merchant guilds, again I'm using that term, they would bring in textiles and brocades from across the world and have them displayed on their float, because it was a status of their float, of their neighborhood, reflecting positively on them. So it's just so intriguing and multi-layered, but which I think is like the essence of all ningyo.
Is the color of the silk, the red color, significant?
I meant to bring that up. When you sort of cast over this, there's a certain palette that emerges. The reds are all done out of a beni safflower. So it's a natural dye, safflower red, which fades to a little bit of an orangey color. So when first done, it's a vif red, but over time it fades to a little bit of an orange, because that's just the natural, the history of the dye. So the red, beni red, would have had that propitiatory, talismanic quality that we were talking about before. And so you see it in his red treasure sack and in this red sheath that hides the staff. And then in the red element, whenever you see red, it's an auspicious, protective kind of thing, almost invariably in a ningyo context. So even his little pom-pom hair things are red. So, I love this doll. Love it,
So
love it, love it, love
this
it,
has
love it.
been protected a lot by
Exactly.
the umbrella, by preserving
Yeah.
the red
Totally
color.
cast in shadow underneath this thing. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, there's a dude in back. And took it out, I was like, oh my God, it's Daikoko. I didn't know, so very, very fun discovery piece that way.
Oh, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. We should do about a whole series of these so people can learn. You are so wonderful, Alan. I appreciate this.
Oh, no, my pleasure. No, it's fun to share. I mean, when I'm working with great material like this, I mean, the script writes itself. I could just riff on these all day long.
Well, I
There's
guess
so
we
much
go
stuff.
back and thank our collector then.
Oh, yeah, and for Michael, for sharing, Michael Ayervais, this collection that you've built, lovingly curated for the last 30 years, sharing it with the world now.
Kudos to you, Michael, really.
It's a very, very exciting moment for not only Ningyo world, but the doll world to actually see this incredible collection come together and actually have an opportunity to take it home. Take parts or all of it. Go for it.
So look for more, and the catalog will be coming out shortly, authored by Alan Scott Pate, so you know a lot more of these wonderful stories will be in there, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thank you.